Wow. I'm exhausted after that. I don't know how you feel, Rod. Man.
So I guess my first question,
Let's just go straight
because I've got a few now.
Is it about how smooth the head of the snare was?
Obviously, the grit of the skin is something I need to know about. You know, like how. But really, what the question I want to ask is, what drew you to this sort of performance art? I think we could call it. What drew you to it?
I mean, this is kind of like a morphed evolution of a lot of stuff that built up. The very start of that was at the time I was doing some stuff with like my laptop and the drum set, and I couldn't afford a DPA or a very nice mic, so I had this really shitty $40 lapel mic. I was like, it's an Omni? How bad could it be? Yeah. So I would just clip it there into my snare, and that's how I did like my live sampling. So I'd play, and that's what picked up the audio. And then it's like for one gig, I think also knowing, because it was kind of cheap, I picked it up and I kind of like hit the drum with it a little bit and kind of did some things. And from that sort of grew the rubbing it on the thing, and then also for feedback, which in here is a little tricky because, you know, you have to get used to the room and all that. But you can actually get quite a lot of pitches with the Critalas and the mic. But yeah, just kind of started going from there, and then before you know it, you've got a comb, and then there's a ruler, and then, you know, the things just kind of start growing on it. Yeah,
it's incredible. Like, this is coming from untrained ears such as myself, because I'm not.
I was told that you had 20 years of experience.
20 years
that's
of
what you did say that
piano.
before.
I mean, you did go
of piano, not
You didn't specify that.
No, you didn't. No.
But from untrained ears such as myself, I've always wondered what I guess you could call are the quantifiable metrics of good or bad in terms of this kind of thing, because obviously it is so detached from the regular things such as like technique and sound and scales, all that kind of stuff. So how would you say you went into a bar and someone was doing things like this, just free improvisation, whatever.
Sounds like a pretty crazy bar.
Yeah, some mental bar, something like that. Would you ever be able to be like, that's not very good, or wow, that was incredible? And how would you judge that?
I mean, yeah, well, it's a multi-level question. So one is I think the ultimate answer is you don't. Like, it's like the real answer. But I think in terms of for specifically the kind of thing that I'm doing, I do rely a lot on a certain amount of dexterity, both physical and mental, from having played a bunch of instruments. So there's like a rate of gesture and a rate of change and a rate of communication that is, I think, hard to do.
Yeah.
So I think there's that, but that's the aesthetic that I like for this sound world. So like someone else might take this and have like these long, slow drones, and that's also really good and interesting. And it's harder to apply that metric. You can't apply the like, looks like they're doing a whole bunch of stuff metric to it. So what you then have to rely on is a little different. It's sort of like the aesthetic version of that. Like and then you talk about like change ideas, like inflection and the same stuff, like sound, technique, all these things like melody, harmony, and rhythm become a little more nebulous other than in a kind of a very abstract way. I mean, that being said, so like those little comb, little clinkety clinks, I didn't do it in this setup, but I have a version of this setup where whilst doing those little clinks, their pitches there, they're just super, super, super high, right?
Yeah.
So I analyze what those pitches are. I transpose them down like 3 or 4 octaves or whatever, and use them as the pitches of when I hit like a kick drum controller, it triggers those notes.
That's so cool.
So while I'm improvising, I'm building the pool of notes that will then draw from. So even in a context of like this context, things like pitches are sort of there. They end up being kind of microtonal and other stuff like that. But yeah, some of the normal things, I'm throwing a lot of air quotes around here, go out the window, like melody, harmony, and rhythm to a certain extent.
So would you say that with this kind of thing, I guess you could say the means justifies the ends, more about the act of creating, sort of the watching of someone create, than it is so much about the sound of the creation?
To a certain extent. I mean, I think like at a base level, I like the aesthetic of some of these sounds. So even in like the more close to vanilla pop music I listen to, there's aspects of grit and kind of unpleasantness in there that I kind of like just at a sonic level. But I think it's trickier. It's trickier to kind of to pull that out.
Because I think for me, watching you do that, was amazing. I'm not sure whether I'd get the same enjoyment out of just hearing a recording of it, if you know what I mean. I think so, because I, again, very untrained ear, don't go into this world very often, but every time I have gone into this world, I'm more fascinated by how the person is creating the sounds than I am so much about the sounds actually being created. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like using combs and that rule that, like, if I was listening to a recording, I didn't know that was a ruler that you were using, you know, it probably wouldn't have been such a dramatic thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think I'm just interested in the sort of, I guess the process and the sort of, I think the process really is what interests me most about this kind of thing.
As a kind of a random pseudo magician-y thing, do you think you've used that exact phrasing because of the webpage not 20 minutes ago?
What, the process?
The process, yeah.
No, but maybe that was like a subconscious thing.
It could have been.
That was a subconscious thing, yeah, I think so.
You've been primed.
Yeah, you've been primed for your thesis.
Brainwashed. There you go. I do know what you mean though, like, because obviously, like, this again, it's not music that I would listen to, but I always enjoy it more when, yeah, like whenever I've been to like a gig or anything like that, where they do explain a little bit, like, yeah, like what's the approach or stuff, because then you can. That's what I take away from it more, because obviously, like conventional music, you take away, like, you know, like you said, like melody and chords. You can be like, oh, that's a nice this or a nice that, but just seeing the process beforehand, I find it much more interesting.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that stuff is like you've just had however many years you've been a live version of that context built up for you already.
Yeah.
So you arrive at the gig with all of that, like decades of someone telling you that, oh, yeah, there's a melody, it goes up and the chords go down. And it's like, you know, like all of that stuff's already pre-baked, you know?
Yeah. It's really interesting because, like, obviously we have sort of westernized musical norms that we've just become so used to just because everything we do is in that context. Obviously in India, they have vastly different norms, but again, they will be subjected to the sort of like the box of their normality. And so was that something that drew you in, was this sort of breaking down of these sort of artistic walls, these musical walls, because, you know, you really, with this kind of thing, you do sort of disregard rhythm, melody, harmony, all these kind of things that we become so accustomed to using. And so was that what drew you in, because you came from a classical perspective, you know, very rigid, very, you know, very harmony and all that kind of stuff? Was it that drew you into this kind of thing?
To a certain extent, but I think there's the second least interesting thing. Like if you have something that's uninteresting, what is the next most uninteresting thing is doing exactly the opposite of that. So like if you have a thing that's like, oh yeah, chords suck. I'm not going to do any chords. That's just as, I mean, not that chords are boring, but like you're doing the same thing. The boundary still defines the activity one way or the other. So I think there's something about that. So I think maybe earlier on, or like when I was first started to mess around with stuff like this, or when I was younger, there was like a rallying against something. But that goes only so far and is only so interesting because it's literally the same thing. You're just like, you know. And there's something to be said for that. Like that's a gesture of like a punky thing. Like I'm not gonna do what you tell me. But then I think having trying to find a different point of or perspective that you find interesting. So for me, what I find interesting with a lot of this, I like gesture, I like space, I like fast changes and things like this, and specifically how these unfold over time. So there's like ebbs and flows. I mean, here it's like kind of an abbreviated performance. I only have some bits, so I sort of did like a sort of smaller version, not necessarily in time, but of what I would use, but how these things are paced. And I find that to be kind of interesting in terms of listening to this, or even like non-music or non-art related things like cubing, you know, like I saw some documentary. I mean, I personally don't do it, but like, you know, you kind of see it and there's things about it that you can draw on that you find interesting and you can relate to, whether directly or not.
Just to give the audience some context, I'm really into Rubik's Cubes at the moment.
I would have thought that would have...
No, you said cubing, which is the cool way of calling it. That's what the cool kids call it. I just don't know whether everyone will know what cubing is.
I mean,
Rubik's
this
Cubes.
is a sophisticated audience.
Yeah, people know. It's all right, man.
Know about cubing.
Yeah, we've got quite a big cubing audience, man. So it's cool. They know what's going on, the lingo. Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to catch up on new episodes every week. Also, check us out on our Facebook and Instagram at RecRooms, where you can find out about our other exciting music series. We also have this and all our other episodes of the podcast up on our RecRooms YouTube channel for your viewing pleasure. See you next time.